that he was urged on by an intense desire to proclaim that great truth of the unity of divinity, which had taken full possession of his own soul. Now, the Arabic word Allahumma, just like Elohim, can be as a qualitative plural. So the polytheist and the monotheist will use the same term, but it doesn't mean that it's contradictory in any sense like that. So it's not that Godhead was what was believed there. But of course, the Christian reads the Bible and sees that term Elohim or whatever variation, but it's really Aleph, Lam, Wow, Hey, Yud, Meme is the spelling in the older version. So that the end to be attained justified to his mind the means he adopted in the production of his suwar, that he worked himself up into a belief that he had received a divine call, and that he was carried on by the force of circumstances, and by gradually increasing successes to believe himself to be the accredited messenger of heaven. And of course, Islam differs between heaven or the sky and the spiritual realms, of the afterlife and that sort of thing. But that's another point somewhere else. The earnestness of those convictions which at Mecca sustained him under persecution, and which perhaps led him at any price, as it were, and by any means, not even excluding deceit and falsehood, to endeavor to rescue his countrymen from idolatry, naturally stiffened at Medina into tyranny and unscrupulous violence. Islam never allowed fighting for anything except self-defense and defense of others, but, okay. At the same time, he was probably, more or less, throughout his whole career, the victim of a certain amount of self-deception. A cataleptic subject from his early youth, born according to traditions of a highly nervous and excitable mother, he would be peculiarly liable to morbid and fantastic hallucinations and alterations of excitement and depression, which would win for him, in the eyes of his ignorant countrymen, the credit of being inspired. Now, if none of this, favor or whatever was going on when he was a child, then that's an issue there. And I know what they're twisting. He had visions of light meditating the cave before he was called to be prophet, and some other stuff happened, but he never had epilepsy. He didn't just fall down and shake and then I've heard ringing and sort of stuff. No. There's stuff about the vibration of the revelation, but it takes a very selective piecemeal or twisting sort of thing to take it as epilepsy. Still, Muhammad's career is a wonderful instance of the force and life that resides in him who possesses an intense faith in God and in the unseen world, and whatever deductions may be made, and they are many and serious, from the noble and truthful in his character, he will always be regarded as one of those who have had the influence over the faith, morals, and whole earthly life of their fellow men, which none but a really great man ever did, or can, exercise, and as one of those whose efforts to propagate some great verity will prosper, in spite of manifold personal errors and defects, both of principle and character. The more insight we obtain from undoubted historical sources into the actual character of Muhammad, the less reason we do find to justify the strong vituperative language poured out upon his head by Marachi, Pradau, and others in recent days, one of whom has found in the Byzantine Mahometus the number of the beast. It is nearer to the truth to say that he was a great teacher, though imperfect character, well, I mean, he wasn't able to memorize, you know, he wasn't the best memorizer out there, or whatever, but, you know, his character wasn't something that people could point at and say, here's a flaw that we, you know, but perfecting, I guess is the better way to put how you refer to a prophet. An earnest, though mistaken teacher, and that many of his mistakes and imperfections were the result of circumstances of temperament and constitution, and there must be elements of both of truth and goodness in his system, of which he was the main author, to account for the whole worldwide phenomenon, that whatever may be the intellectual inferiority, if such is indeed the fact, of the Muslim races, the influence of its teaching aided, it is true, by the vast impulse given to it by the victorious arms of his followers, and now lasted for nearly 13 centuries and embraces more than 100 millions of our race, more than 1/10 part of the inhabitants of the globe. And I'm recording this in the year 1442, and of course, you know, 13 years before Al-Hijra, but, and, you know, the Quran's not a Bible. It was passed on as is. There was no collection of books. It was just, you know, so it doesn't fit in that sort of temperament. Nearly 100 years has gone by since Rodwell wrote these words. In the interval, the further spread of Islam has been so considerable that the growth in the world's population has been so rapid that the figures generally accepted nowadays are between 3 and 4 times those he estimated, and the proportion of the Muslimin is thought to have reached 1/7, though such statistics are surely unreal, seeing that they embrace men, women, and children, and assume 100% allegiance to Islam in the communities claimed for that faith. Well, but those communities also admit that there's existence of Christians and Jews and other things. That's long been the case. Whereas Sale had Hinkleman and Marachi on his work table, Rodwell was able to use the Leipzig 1841 text of Al-Quran, edited by Gustav Flugel. He criticized Sale for having followed Marachi too closely, especially by introducing his paraphrasistic comments into the body of the text. He followed the growing fashion of his mid-Victorian themes by deploring his constant use of Latinized instead of Saxon words. Rodwell was concerned, and he was the first English translator so to be preoccupied with attempting in some degree to imitate the style of the Arabic original. The more brief and poetical verses of the earlier Suwar are translated with a freedom from which I have altogether abstained in the historical and prosaic portions. But I have endeavored nowhere to use a greater amount of paraphrase than is necessary to convey the sense. I have nowhere attempted to represent the rhymes of the original. The Proben of H.V. Purgstall and the Fundgruben des Orients, especially excellent as they are in many respects, show that this can only be done with the sacrifice of literal translation. G. Rogoliuth, who edited Rodwell's translation for Every Man's Library, was much taken by its merits, which are indeed considerable. One is happy to be able to say that Rodwell's rendering is one of the best that have as yet been produced. It seems to have, to a great extent, to carry with it the atmosphere in which Muhammad lived, and its sentences are imbued with the flavor of the East. The quasi-verse form, with its unfettered and irregular rhythmic flow of the lines, which has in suitable cases been adopted, helps to bring out much of the wild charm of the Arabic. Not the least among its recommendations is, perhaps, that it is scholarly without being pedantic. That is to say, that it aims at correctness without sacrificing the right effect of the whole to over-insistence on small details. As a specimen of this well-established translation, here is Rodwell's version of the virgin birth, as throughout he follows the division into verses established in Fluegel's edition.